guys, Diesel here, and today I'm going to be doing something a little different this year. I've realized that last year most of my stuff was nothing but Thomas videos, and don't get me wrong, I like Thomas, but after reviewing Season 1 and 2, I think I finally found my new style on reviewing a show or a movie. And now that I've found it, I want to put it to the test on reviewing other stuff. And I think I found the perfect show to test my new skills at. As a kid, while watching and loving Thomas, Cartoon Network was my favorite channel of all time. I would watch Cartoon Network like all the time, and they would have shows that I would laugh, love the characters, and love the animations. These were the shows that started my love for comedy, and one of my favorite Cartoon Network shows is Ed, Edd, and Eddy. Yeah, it doesn't really come up that much as a surprise because this show is so popular, and watching it again, it is a good show. The characters are likable, the animation is good, and the jokes are really funny. But with that being said, much like Thomas, how well does this show hold up? Is it the perfect cartoon, or are there some stuff in it that really doesn't work as well as others? Well, that's what we're going to find out here today. We're going to take a look at all the seasons and the specials, as well as the movie. Now, there will be some similarities and differences between this and Thomas. I'll still keep the ratings I'll give to the episodes and seasons. If you want to know what the ratings are, watch my Seasons 1 or 2 review of Thomas the Tank Engine. I'll even still talk about other stuff in the seasons, but the difference is that I'll probably just talk about the characters and animation, and that'll probably be about it. Also, I do love Ed and Eddy, but that doesn't mean I'm going to hold back on the episodes that doesn't work, or say that every episode is gold. So I will be fair to the show. So without further ado, let's get started. Episode 1A, The Ed Touchables. The Eds are trying to find out who keeps touching people's stuff. So for the first episode, the jokes are really funny for the first time. The timing is perfect, and the slapstick is good. Right off the bat, when Double D answers the door, we get some really funny deliveries and funny slapsticks. And the animation, while there are some mistakes with it, it also helps with the slapstick to its advantage. Also, the characters are greatly introduced, and it's easy to see them as friends, especially the Eds. And also, this is the first time where, technically, they're not really scamming anybody. I mean, okay, they got the wrong person, but at the same time, they're at least trying to help them. So, for the first episode, I'll give this a 9 out of 10. A good episode. Episode 1B, Nag to Ed. The Eds meet the Kanker sisters. Now we get introduced to the final characters for the show, the Kanker sisters. They're both funny and creepy at the same time. I remember them scaring the heck out of me when they first showed up, and the music also helps with the scariness. Their characters are just like the Eds if they were girls. The humor is pretty good in this episode. There's some good jokes in here, and I like how Eddy stands up for Ed, and also Double D at the end, but realized that he went too far. I actually kind of like that. But you also understand the Kanker sisters because the Eds are sort of being rude, but then again, they were also taking advantage of them at the end. So, this episode will get an 8 out of 10 for me. A good episode. Episode 2A, Pop Goes the Eds. The Eds tried to cool themselves from the heat. I remember as a kid, the DVD I got from Season 1 had this episode first, and the first one the second episode. A bit weird. But anyway, this episode is a fun episode. It's the first time where we see the Eds are battling against the heat, and the party scenes are pretty great, and they capture on how some people act when they go to parties. The best example is when Double D and Ed are trying to mingle with the kids. It's both awkward and funny at the same time. The slapstick is good in this episode, so this episode will get a hot 8 out of 10. A good episode. Episode 2B, Over Your Ed. Ed starts to become popular. This episode is another good episode. I like Ed, he's one of my favorite characters on the show, and this episode is the first good episode on him. I like on how hyper Double D gets from the drinks, and they keep it until the end of the episode. Some of the lines Cool Ed says are a little corny, but that's the whole joke, and the way he says them are funny, and the intro is a cool show. A good show for me to rate this episode a 7 out of 10. A good episode. Episode 3A, Sir Ed-a-Lot. The Eds are playing with Sarah and Jimmy. This episode is pretty fun. There's no real scam involved, but that's good because you can pretty much do whatever you want with this episode. This episode also gives us a more in-depth with Sarah and Jimmy, and most of us probably want to smack Sarah. The slapstick is funny, and the punishment is perfect for both Sarah and Jimmy. And as the Kingdom cartoons, I give this episode an 8 out of 10. A good episode. Episode 3B, A Pinch to Grow an Ed. Eddy wants to become taller. I like how in this episode they keep a mix of punishment between each of the characters. You understand Eddy's anger and feel sorry for him when other kids are making fun of him for being short. But it's also nice to see a true friendship with the Eds. and I like that they give a right amount of punishment to Eddy when he goes too far with the boots. So this episode gets a tall rating of 8 out of 10. A good episode. Episode 3A, Dawn of the Eds. The Eds wants to go see an R-rated movie. This episode, I don't get it. The story is a bit confusing. Are the Eds in a dream? Was it because they fell so hard out of the pipe that they think they were on another planet? Or do they realize they were just playing the game? I mean, I'm willing to buy anything if it makes sense, but I'm a bit confused on this story. Now, there were still some jokes that made me laugh, and the premise on an R-rated movie is funny and clever. Plus, Ed's narration does get a laugh out of me. So while there are still some good stuff in this episode, I'm going to have to give this episode a 5 out of 10, an okay episode. Episode 3B, Ver Ed Go. The Eds build a clubhouse. This is another episode I'm not sure how to feel. Again, the jokes are still funny, and the timing on slapstick is pretty good, but I felt like nothing else was anything that great or memorable. The story is okay, it is neat to see the Eds build a clubhouse, and like I said, the montage of them building a clubhouse is good with some really funny slapstick. But everything else, it just feels like something is missing, and I can't quite tell on what it is. The Kanker sisters felt like they were forced into the story. I really didn't see the purpose of them being in this episode. Sorry, Eds, but for your club, I'm gonna have to give it a rating of 6 out of 10. A good, but not a memorable episode. Episode 5A, Read All About Ed. The Eds deliver newspapers. This episode is pretty much what you expect. The Eds just deliver newspapers. What you see is what you get. Now, the humor is still pretty funny, and the slapstick was good in this episode, and I did laugh at a few jokes. So there's some good news there. And as a critic, I would rate this newspaper a 7 out of 10. A good episode. Episode 5B, Quick Shot Ed. Eddy wants to make a calendar. There's something about this episode I never realized until just now that I think is both awesome and a clever idea. About how they compare the Eds taking the photos of the kids into animals and also giving them animal traits. This is such a cool idea, and they found perfect characters to match the themes of a certain animal. Major props to the writer staffs for coming up with that idea. The episode itself is also a very good episode. The jokes, once again, are funny, and the punishment the Eds get is a good punishment. And the photos themselves are good, and go great together with the humor. I rate this episode and their calendar a 9 out of 10. A great episode. Episode 6A, An Ed Too Many. Sarah falls in love with Double D. Oh boy, this episode. There's so many good and bad things about this episode. Okay, let's talk about the good stuff first. I like the idea of showing, Sarah and Jimmy and how different they feel when they don't have each other. It's a neat idea. But if there's one thing that Ed and Eddy should never try is romance stories, or try to make a comedy out of romance, because it barely works for this show. There's another episode that has the same problem, but one episode at a time. I get what they're trying to do with this episode, but the way Sarah is coming on to Double D, it doesn't come off as funny, it comes off as creepy. You really almost feel sorry for him, and anyone that's ever been in this kind of situation knows how Double D feels. At least with Bugs Bunny, he only does it because A, the characters asked for it, and B, is only because of revenge, and that's what comes off as funny. This just feels like I said, creepy. And the ending, I feel like the ending was just lazily put together. It's like, oh hey Jimmy, I know I abandoned you to go off to see Double D, but would you like to hang out? No, I'm sorry, it doesn't work like that. While it's no means a terrible episode, it's still not an excuse for me to give this a 5 out of 10. An okay episode. Episode 6B, Ed and Seek. The Eds play hide and seek with the kids. Yeah, there's not much to say in this episode, it's just kids playing hide and seek. Which is somewhat clever and leads to some clever hidden spots, resulting in some cartoon logic. The plot is simple enough, though I felt the third act is a bit weak. But the episode is simple enough, like I said, and it seeks a 7 out of 10. A good episode. Episode 7A, Look Into My Eds. Eddy hypnotizes the cul-de-sac. This episode is a perfect example on how far you can take a character based on their traits. This is the first time where we see Eddy being a villain. I mean, sure, he scammed kids, but he's never done anything like this before. The visual gags they come up with the hypnotizing kids is really creative and very funny. And this is also a good example on how to give a proper punishment to a character's antics. And I think this episode hypnotized me into giving this an 8 out of 10. A good episode. Episode 7B, Tag Your Ed. The Eds wrestle the Kanker sisters. This is another episode that shows the Eds' friendship. I like how much Eddy is trying to help and stand up for Double D. It may not be much, but hey, he's doing something that doesn't involve scamming the kids. The wrestling scene is fun, playing homage to other cartoon wrestling shorts, and the animation is pretty good. This episode gets an 8 out of 10. A good episode. Episode 8A, Fool on the Ed. The kids are being pranked by the Prank Master. This episode would make for a really good April Fool's episode. Once again, the humor pays tribute to old school slapstick humor, like Looney Tunes and Tom and Jerry. However, there are a few animation mistakes that is noticeable, and I understand it's a cartoon and you can't really explain too much, but how did the kids even prank themselves with some of the pranks they've pulled? I mean, I can understand Jimmy, Rolf, and even Johnny, but the rest are a bit too much to swallow. However, with the good slapstick and some good moments, I could at least give this episode a 6 out of 10. A good episode. Episode 8B, A Boy in His Head. The Eds want Kevin's Jawbreakers. So this episode, I remember this episode being okay for me as a kid, and yeah, I still find it okay. The pacing in this episode is okay. At first it's going on really nicely, but the ending just felt like it wasn't completed. The humor is still funny, and the animation is good in this episode. Like I said, it's not bad, but I will give this episode a 5 out of 10. A meh episode, and it's mostly due to the story and pacing. Episode 9A, It's Way Ed. The Eds are trying to stay in the fad. I really like this episode because I can relate to the Eds here. When it comes to new stuff, I tend not to know too much about it or don't really care until the fad dies down and I get to try it. That's the reason why I try not to review anything too recently. It's very true on how something can be very popular around lots of people that everyone will try it, and again, some, like myself, are a bit behind with the new fad. But it's also very true on how that fad dies down really quickly until something new becomes popular. I mean, look at all the memes. The humor is really funny and the pacing was good in this episode. I rate this episode a 9 out of 10. A very great episode. Episode 9B, Laugh Ed Laugh. Eddy goes insane. Oh boy, this episode is genius. I love the idea of this episode. It goes into a character of Eddy and what would really happen if there were no kids to scam. Eddy's insanity is funny and the slapstick is great, and the humor once again got some big laughs out of me. This episode is driving me crazy enough to give this episode a 10 out of 10. Another great episode. Episode 10A, A Glass of Warm Ed. Ed is sleepwalking. What's this? Have I found my most favorite episode of this season? I have. Boy, this episode. This is a perfect example on how you can make a simple plot and make it really funny and memorable. I love the music for this episode. It is so perfect and fits perfectly to this episode. The humor is really funny and the slapstick is perfect. Ed is just sleepwalking, but there are a lot of great jokes with this. And with that, I can rest easy because I gave this episode a 10 out of 10. A very great episode. Episode 10B, A Flea-Bitten Ed. Ed is allergic to rabbits. This was a pretty fun episode. The story was nice and the pacing was pretty good. The idea of the plot and the humor with Ed blowing his nose and the whole doctor routine was fun. And the moment with Rolf's animals being clean had some pretty funny moments as well. Nothing great, but it was so fun that I'll give this a clean rating of an 8 out of 10. A good episode. Episode 11A, Who, What, Where, Ed. The Eds are trying to get Rolf's egg. Another really funny and simple episode. The way this episode is paced is really good. Nothing feels too rushed or too long. It's nice and balanced, and once again the humor is really funny. The trades that the Eds go through are pretty funny, and I would trade this episode for a nice 9 out of 10. A great episode. Episode 11B, Keeping Up with the Eds. The Eds mow the lawn. This episode is a pretty fun episode. I love the animation for the growing of the grass. The jokes were funny and I got a few laughs. The pacing was okay in this episode, though I felt like the ending was just kind of thrown in. But nevertheless, this episode gets a fresh cut of an 8 out of 10. A good episode. Episode 12A, Eds are great, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right because I'm not that very good in English. Anyway, the Eds lie to Kevin about the Monkey Boys. This episode is pretty mediocre. I like how the episode plays out about telling the truth and what a lie could lead to. We've seen this all the time when it comes to making false claims about people and crime itself. and the way it plays out is pretty good, though it is very easy to notice some animation errors in this episode, like some of the mouth movements and a little bit of the editing. So I won't lie, even though it's not bad, I'll give this a 6 out of 10. A good, but pretty mediocre. Episode 12B, Both to an Ed. The Eds join the Urban Rangers. Story time. I used to be a Cub Scout when I was young, and truth be told, I stopped caring for it when I was about 7 or 8. So, in a way, I can understand the Ed's frustration on trying to earn a badge. Anyway, the episode itself is a fine episode, although the beginning part I felt went nowhere. I really don't know what the point of it was. I mean, it led to some good visual gags, but other than that, there was really no point to it. The rest is simple. It's just Edge trying to do something to get a badge, but fail really miserably. And it does lead to some good jokes. So I will give this episode a 7 out of 10. A good episode badge. Episode 13A, Button Your Ed. Eddy can't talk. So now we're getting to the first part of the end of this season, and it's a good way to end off the season. The visual gags are great in this episode. I've got a pretty good amount of chuckle from this episode. Plus the animation also helps with the gags. I felt pretty sorry for Eddy, but at the same time, it's not really the Ed's fault. They're trying to help him out, even though they're going a bit too far with it. Don't ring my bell, but this episode gets a 9 out of 10. A great episode. Episode 13B, Avast the Eds. The Eds, Jimmy, and Johnny go on a cruise. The final episode, and it's a good note to end off the season. The Eds doing their usual scam, the imagination, and of course, the Kanker sisters. The C part of the episode is fun, plus there's some good moments in this episode. The pirate chase, 88 Fingers Edward, and the animation. It was pretty good, but as for the final episode I've dug up, I'll give this an 8 out of 10. A good episode. And that was every episode of Season 1 of Ed, Edd and Eddy. Okay, so before we do anything else, let's take a look at the episode counter. So if we look at the episode counter, Season 1 had 23 good episodes, 3 meh episodes, and 0 bad episodes. The 3 meh episodes in this season were Dawn of the Eds, An Ed Too Many, and A Boy and His Ed, and most of these were because of the story and pacing themselves. They're not bad, but compared to the other episodes in this season, they are pretty weak. Now here are my top 5 favorite episodes from this season. Number 5, Button Your Ed. Pretty good animation with some good visual gags. Number 4, Laugh Ed Laugh. A pretty awesome what-if type of story with lots of good humor. Number 3, Quick Shot Ed. A great commentary on animals and humans. Number 2, Who, What, Where Ed. Nice premise, and I wouldn't trade this episode for anything else. And number 1, A Glass of Warm Ed. A great example on taking a simple story and making it funny. Alright, the episode list is done. Let's move on to the characters. Let's start with the Eds first. The Eds are always known by most people the Cartoon Network's version of the Three Stooges, and even though I never watched the Three Stooges, I can see the comparison. What really makes them stand out is the characters themselves, and the way they play off each other. You have Ed, who is dumb, gets excited, and basically lives in his own world. But what really makes him likable is his character and his loyalty to his friends. You can't help but to smile at this big lug. He can be stupid, but they don't overdo it too much. They do it at the right time and moment, and there are some times where he does shine. He's one of my favorite characters in the whole entire show. Then you got Double D, the smart guy, a big dork, and a weakling, but very helpful, and how much he puts up with Ed and Eddy, well mostly Eddy, really tells you about their friendship, and how he's there to make sure that both Ed and Eddy are in check. And then you have Eddy, the stuck-up, wants lots of money, mostly for jawbreakers, but also wants to be really rich. And you might think he doesn't care at all, but there are some episodes where he actually does stand up for his two pals. And in the end, I think he still considers them as friends. These three men are so likable that even if they do the wrong things, you can't help but to feel a little sorry for some of them. The other characters in this show also help give the Eds something to work off from. They each have their own traits, and they also make the jokes for them. Rolf is the farm boy, Johnny is, Johnny, and of course there's the Kanker sisters. So for the characters of a whole, I'll give them a 9 out of 10. Finally, let's talk about the animation. For the first season, there were some noticeable animation errors here and there, but it's the first season, and usually you'll always have mistakes no matter how good the show is. But with that said, the animation is still pretty good. Though the backgrounds looked something out of a storybook for children, I'm not sure if that was their reasoning or something, but I still think it looks good. The animation on the characters are good as well. From what I've heard from the creators, the walk cycle on the characters are also supposed to show their emotions and their way of thinking. And looking at them again, I can actually kind of see that. That's pretty interesting. So, for the animation, I'll give it an 8 out of 10. So after all the episode ratings and the season itself, Season 1 will get a 7 out of 10. As the first season to start off the show, it's a pretty good season. There were some good episodes, good characters, and a lot of jokes that even if the episode itself wasn't all that great, there were still lots of funny moments from the episode. And I can safely say that this show holds up pretty well so far. But that was only one season. How will the rest of the seasons compare? Well, find out next time when we start to look at those seasons. So till then, this is Accord Diesel saying thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Take care, guys.